So, has anybody been reading Ezra and Nehemiah the last few weeks? Getting yourself confused with the historical passages again? This is looks like a book that might have been put together by a third grader. You know, sort of cut out from here and there and then all pasted together, and it's all out of order. What I imagine is that the scribe who was putting this book together probably had all these passages that he wanted to include, and he had them all laid out, you know, so that he could copy them, and then someone came by and bumped into his writing stand, and they all fell on the floor, and it looks almost, it's all sort of messed around. We're going to deal with some specific questions today that arise out of the story, the historical situation during the period that we're talking about. What is the title of today's lesson, by the way? Mixed marriage. And the key text this particular week is Ezra. Okay, the memory text this week was Ezra. 2 Corinthians. I can't. What in the world would 2 Corinthians have to do with Ezra and Nehemiah? I don't know. Huh? Counsel for them and for us? Well, now, you know, if you read this chapter in Ezra and you read the parts in Nehemiah that are similar to it, they came up with a sort of radical solution to the problem. I don't know how a solution like that would fly today. You got to that part, right? The solution to the problem that they used? Interesting solution, huh? Oh, it was drastic, all right. Here are the questions we're going to deal with today, okay? You can file these away and start thinking about them. What was the great religious, social, political problem faced by Ezra? And what were the consequences of this problem? What solution to the problem was suggested by Shechaniah and adopted as national policy? Okay. Then what was the great religious, social, and political problem faced by Nehemiah? And what were the consequences of this problem? And what solution to the problem was imposed? I want to note a difference here. Imposed by Nehemiah, probably supported by Malachi, with a very special warning. Then what do you think Paul meant by his counsel in 2 Corinthians? And what other advice do Paul and Peter offer to individuals in similar, not identical circumstances? And then, of course, what we have to do always. What is the great religious, social, and political problem faced by the church today? The wording and sequence of those questions don't necessarily prejudice the last one, but it is frequently a tactic of the teacher to lead one to a pointed conclusion. So let's take a really quick review. We won't go through all of this, okay? This is all historical stuff that's really important, but I know a lot of people are bored by history, so we won't spend time on all of it. But there are some important dates here, aren't there? Not only for these lessons in this quarter, but also for the theology of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, right? This is the critical period. This is sort of the hook period on which all of our prophetic theologies are hung, right? Right? I should be having uniform nodding of heads here. What is the first key date in this period? Okay, well, I can cheat a little bit. and Cephas and say, well, that's a good answer, but it's the wrong one. That's the second key date. What's the first key date in this period? This era that we're talking about here. I can wait as long as you can. What's the first key date, please? These are bits of history that are not trivia. 535. Well, the traditional date is a little bit different, but that's close, and that's a good key date. In fact, that's the first key date. Actually, that's not quite right, is it? These are the second and third key dates. What is the beginning point for all of this particular section of history that is so important to our understanding of prophecy in the 19th and 20th centuries? Well, that's the third one. And we already said 538, 765 is the second one. The first is, well, I know you know this guy's name. It's that big long one with two Z's in it. Nebuchadnezzar, what about him? Destroys the city of Jerusalem and deports all important citizens to the empire. Date, please. This is the beginning of the so-called period of exile. .587 is the ending of this short period of history. The three invasions by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians and the deportations that went with them, beginning about 609, 607, with the final destruction of Jerusalem in 587. Critical dates. Whether you're interested in history or not, there are some dates that are important. 1776 is a date of importance to every American, is it not? Whether you think anything of history or not, enjoy it or not, 1776 is a date to remember. For Seventh-day Adventist Christians, those dates are so long ago that none of us have any memory of them. Well, I don't think anyone here has any memory of those dates. But they are every bit as important as 1776 is to an American. Let us remember them, please. Okay. 1844 was the end of the era that begins during the period of these lessons. And how long is this era? 2,300 years. You recognize that number now? Let's not forget these. These are, if anything, among the 2 or 3 distinguishing marks of this group's theology. Okay. Who was king during the time of these lessons, by the way? Who was the king? Is it fair to ask who was the king? We began with Nebuchadnezzar, passed on to Cyrus, and now with Ezra and Nehemiah we have Artaxerxes. You know, reading about these kings is interesting, especially how most of them got to be kings. What was the typical pattern, by the way, for becoming a king in the time of men like Darius and Artaxerxes and all of these guys? How did you usually become king? Beg pardon? By inheriting it? from your father? How many would say yes to that? Sounds like a good suggestion. Not much agreement here. It was hereditary, right? I mean, that's how kings got to be kings. All right, come on, show of hands. Kings got to be kings in this period by inheriting the throne. Not very many votes for that one, Don. Well, that was the way it was supposed to be anyway. Overthrow the ruler and replace him, who might very likely be a relative, father, brother, uncle. Cyrus the Great, interesting story. You read about his grandfather was a king named Astyages, who was the great emperor of the Medes. And his grandson Cyrus was, well, naturally kings did things for their sons and grandsons, right? I mean, you couldn't just have sons and grandsons running around being unimportant. So you made them important. In the case of Cyrus, Astyages had made Cyrus a king of the Persian tribes, a vassal king, naturally. He was a grandson and all of that. Astyages had a son named Cyaxares. He was the second of that name in Median and Persian history. And Cyrus married Cyaxares' daughter. Okay? So, not only was Astyages Cyrus' grandfather, but he was also related to the family by having Cyaxares' son, his uncle, also his father-in-law. Not unusual at all. Okay, don't be alarmed by the convoluted family relationships. This was the rule rather than the exception. Okay? We have a later king of the Persians who is married to his sister. We have lots of oddball relationships in these Oriental. Well, we remember we had a few back in. What was that king that married the king of Israel? Wasn't he? That had sort of a similar thing going. Family members. Well, at least one. Not unusual at all. This was the rule rather than the exception. Okay? And it was not unusual for the king to become king by killing or displacing the current king. I want to point out one big difference about Cyrus, however. Cyrus was a very unusual man. The Bible makes it plain that God picked Cyrus out of the crowd. And there are probably a number of reasons for that. When one did become king, it was also the usual practice to, especially if one had done so by murdering the incumbent or having the incumbent murdered, it was most usual for you to follow up that accession by killing everybody in a position to dispute you, especially all of the male members of the preceding ruler's family, okay? Which could include your own father, brothers, even sons, and so forth, to ensure your own throne. The historical evidence is very strong that Cyrus was not that kind of man. Astyages lived out his days as governor of a very important province in Cyrus' kingdom. Cyaxares, Cyrus' father-in-law, was not killed, by his son-in-law, as might be expected, but he too became an important man in Cyrus' kingdom. Cyrus's, well, let's see, what would he be? He would be a Cyaxares was his father-in-law. I was trying to think of what the other family relationship would be. It's even possible that Cyaxares is Darius the Mede in our Bible stories in the book of Daniel. Nobody seems to know who Darius the Mede is. There doesn't seem to be a historical Darius the Mede, but it seems probable that Cyrus may even have shared his throne as king of the Medes and Persians with his father-in-law and uncle Cyaxares. Most unusual in ancient times. Please don't be under the impression that Cyrus was a weakling who was forced to do these things. Cyrus was one of the most powerful kings of his age, unchallenged as ruler of his empire. He was also one of the most able generals of his age. You know that the campaign that ended in the taking of the city of Babylon lasted less than 6 weeks. And in that period of 6 weeks, Cyrus conquered all of the core empire of Neo-Babylonia. In fact, he was so skillful that after destroying the main Babylonian army near the Euphrates River, he marched unopposed to the great city of Sippara and captured it without a fight. And only 2 days later, 40 miles to the east, he took the city of Babylon virtually unopposed, the capital city of the empire. More of the same, you know. The king of Babylon at the time, who was the king of Babylon at the time of the fall of the empire? The Bible mentions Belshazzar. He was co-king with his father Nabonidus. Nabonidus was outside the city with the Babylonian army and escaped, but couldn't leave the country. Cyrus had the area pretty well locked up, so he returned to the city of Babylon, expecting to be imprisoned at best, executed probably, and instead he was restored a portion of his estates and made an honored guest of the king for the rest of his life. Cyrus was a most unusual man. It's not hard to understand a man like Cyrus, who seems to have been such a good and decent person by comparison with a lot of kings of his era, for him to hear the story of a prophecy made centuries before his birth and to put that story into action by decreeing the return of the Jews to Jerusalem. In fact, given the sort of man that we know Cyrus was, it would have been unusual for him not to have done that. I'm going to ask you a question. This isn't a stupid question now. It's not even silly. I want you to tell me what you had for lunch last Tuesday. Ray, you don't eat lunch. What'd you have for dinner on Tuesday? Can't even guess? Probably vegetables, potatoes. A week ago last Thursday, what did you have for dinner, sir? Yeah. No idea at all? This is appalling. How about a year ago, last Wednesday? John, what did you have for lunch that day? What an amazing memory. Good question. What kind of soup? Now we both know he's lying, right? Okay. Men. Just men now. Because I know the women know this one. Okay? Just the men. Just the married men. Okay? Just the married men. What was your wife wearing? Just the color now. We won't go any further than that. What color was your wife wearing the first time you met her? That's an important date, right? I mean, that's a big date in most guys' lives, especially married guys. What color was she wearing? John, what color was she wearing? Was it blue? No, I didn't think so. What about you? What was she wearing? Color, just color.
I don't know.
I'll bet she does.
She doesn't know either.
No. Whew. Boy, he got away with that one. I grew up in a household where potato salad was made with mayonnaise. Okay? How many of you grew up, gentlemen, just guys, I'm not gonna, how many of you men grew up with mayonnaise on the table? Okay? Mayonnaise. All right. How many of you grew up with salad dressing, you know, like Miracle Whip? Okay? Have any of you made the change from mayonnaise to Miracle Whip since you were married? No? Miracle Whip to mayonnaise? Tell you, I went the other way. Mayonnaise to Miracle Whip. Ask yourself a question. When you were a sophomore in college, any college sophomores here? No. When you were a sophomore in college, what did you plan to do in life? Okay? Think about that one. And how many of you actually have done, meaning are doing now, what you plan to do then? Debbie, Brother Kennedy, Elder Schmidt, Don, how about the rest of you? It's funny how time changes things, isn't it? Now, this is a non-judgmental remark, what I'm about to say, okay? Please don't draw any inferences from what I'm about to say in terms of judgment, okay? How many of you have been Adventists from childhood? Seventh-day Adventists from childhood? Okay? When you were a child, how often did you see anyone attend church wearing other than what were then called church clothes? Men wore this, Women wore an appropriately dressy combination of blouse and skirt or dress. Am I right? Beg pardon? If someone had come to church wearing something else when you were a child, well, let's start with the question, would anyone have attended church wearing anything else when you were a kid? How about blue jeans, sneakers, sweatshirt, jewelry? You know, I think when I was a kid, no one would have even considered doing that. And if they had, it would immediately have been disapproved of by everyone else who saw it happen. Am I right? Okay? Hats. With the little, around the, yeah. And today, now, I remember when you couldn't use certain words on television. You never heard them. If anyone's puzzled by what I mean, there seems to be today nothing that isn't acceptable or tolerated at the least and accepted as it's just an alternative lifestyle. Would anyone have gotten away with that remark 40 years ago? What happens in the passage of 40 years? When I was a small boy, I became a New York Yankee fan. It's a real simple story. My Uncle Marty, who lived in New York City, where at the time, you men remember, there were 3 baseball teams, took me to an exhibition baseball game in the spring of 1952. It was an exhibition baseball game played by the New York Yankees and the New York Giants in the Polo Grounds, a field that isn't there anymore. Did anyone here ever attend the game, ever see the Polo Grounds when it was huge? It was like playing baseball on a farm. It was huge baseball field. It was the perfect showcase for the talents of men like Willie Mays and Mickey Mantle, who played center field for those 2 clubs, because they could run forever and chase baseballs that would be in the stands a half an hour earlier today. The Yankees won that ball game, so naturally a very young boy became a Yankee fan. But I'm 40 years older, actually more, now. It doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Baseball is something I hear about on the evening news, but it's, I don't collect baseball cards anymore. I sold my collection. I can't claim to be a fan anymore. I'm way too busy with other things. Anybody else in the same boat? What happened in 40 years? My values have changed. Why? I'm more mature. I should be. Is that oh. First she says I'm more mature, and then she says I should be. Oh, because what I asked in between. Feel much better now. What does 40 years have to do with the difference between then and now? Let me ask you a different question. If anyone thinks we're not talking about the lesson, probably didn't study it. If Sister White were to be resurrected, some miracle, and she were resurrected, were to attend this church for the next 3 or 4 weeks, do you think her reaction might be? Epileptic seizure? Massive stroke? Apoplexy, I think they called it in her day. Why? Well, for one thing, she died in 1915, which is 78 years ago. 78 years ago? What does 78 years have to do with anything? Well, let's see. From 587 to 538 is 50 years. From 538 or 537 to 457 is 80 years. That's less than the time between here and Sister White's death. Right? What do you suppose happened during those 80 years? Style of living changed. There were more inventions. There were wars. First remark was the one we want to focus on. Times change. You notice I keep coming back to something. We are so different from those folk. That's why it's so easy for us to condemn them. Because we are so much wiser today. We would never allow the kind of changes that took place in Ezra's Israel to occur in our church. Can you imagine Jews who had lived through the exile marrying their sons and daughters off to foreigners? Worse, they weren't just foreigners, they were heathen. We would never do such a thing. Would we? What happened to the Jews in the period between whenever and Ezra's time? What happened to them? Well, let's see. There was the airplane, and there was the automobile, and there was telegraph and radio, and finally television. and jet airplanes until the world was so small How many of you drove more than 20 miles to church today? You know, your great-grandmother couldn't have made that trip unless they had started in the middle of the night. You know that? Even at the turn of the century, 20 miles was the rough radius of a day's journey here in the United States. Go someplace and come back the same day. Did you know that? Isn't that amazing? But there weren't any motor cars or airplanes or television in the Jews' day, so wasn't any reason for them to change, was there? What was the great religious, social, political problem faced by Ezra? Mixed marriage. Meaning, Jews marrying what? Pagans? Oh, it's worse than that. Do you know that Jews were marrying other Jews? Yeah. Sanballat. You remember that guy? He's in the book of Nehemiah, right? We're going to get to him a little bit later. You remember Sanballat? Sanballat was a heathen, right? He was a pagan, Sumerian, right? Can we get agreement on this? Show of hands. Sanballat. Pagan, heathen, Sumerian. I know you're just playing it safe. What was Sanballat? Huh? You've been reading ahead, haven't you? This Sanballat was a Jew. Well, not a Jew. What was a Jew? What was a Jew? In Ezra's day, what was a Jew? This is one of those historical keys, people. Huh? From Judah? Someone from Judah? Actually, you can be more specific. What was a Jew? Huh? From the tribe of Judah or Benjamin, we can be more specific. A Jew was of the return. Okay? You were one who had returned or the descendant of one who had returned. So Sanballat wasn't a Jew. What was he? Didn't know this, I bet you. Well, he was an Israelite too. He was one that never went. We know he was almost said it, didn't I? We know he was an Israelite because he gave his children, his sons, Yahwist names. He was a Yahwist. What's a Yahwist? What was a Yahwist?
Yahwist was somebody who had Yahwist in the religion before the exile. A Jew was somebody that the Jewish religion, the religion that came back after the exile. They were very different.
But I thought the Jews worshipped Yahweh too. Weren't they Yahwists too, John?
No, they wouldn't even say the name Yahweh.
Terrible. You see how confused you can get if you don't learn a little bit about the history of the period? I thought Yahweh was the God of the Bible. Didn't you? So how come a guy who worshipped Yahweh was considered to be a heathen? And marrying his sons to your Jewish daughters was... How come? Both worshiping the same God, aren't we? I mean, you know, sort of like Lutherans and Catholics and Adventists do. I mean, it's the same God, isn't it? Oh, we were talking about the Jews. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to confuse that with present history. What do you suppose Paul meant in 2 Corinthians when he said, be not... What did he say? Unequally yoked together. Now, I know Paul was talking only about marriage, right? I mean, can we establish that right up front? Paul was only talking about marriage, right? What was the problem that the Jews had marrying Yahwists? What were the consequences of these marriages? In other words, what was wrong with it? Isn't that the question we most often ask today? Instead of the what's right with it question? Isn't it usually what's wrong with it? The inference being it's okay until proven otherwise. Think about that philosophy for a moment. Whatever you think is okay is until someone proves otherwise. You don't suppose we have a parallel here with the Jews, do you? Well, listen, you know, I grew up in Babylon, Dubuque. And Judah is, 800 miles from Dubuque is about 1,100 miles from here. And you know, places are different. People are different. And you have to, you have to kind of go along or you don't fit in. And then you can't, you know what I mean? I mean, I've got to look out for my family, and to do that, there's this, you know, you kind of, there's some things, you know, you kind of have to. I know the Jews would never have thought of it that way. Right? Because they're not like us. They were just bad people who constantly forgot God was the... What was Ezra's solution to the problem? Oh, what? The problem was, what was that again? The problem with Ezra's, you know, in Ezra's time, what was that problem again? Mixed marriages. What solution was devised for the problem in Ezra's day? Put them on Social Security and send them home. Well, it's an interesting thought. Specifically, what were they to do? The Bible phrase is, put them away. What did putting them away mean? Put that in 1993 language. Divorce them. How many of these men were to divorce their wives? How many of them? Hundreds, including a few priests, excuse me. What do you think? What do you think, man? Is this a solution for the 1990s?
Good morning. Welcome to Sabbath School. My apologies to the teachers this morning. We got a call this week, and there was some work that we wanted to do in Sabbath School, so I'm going to start a little earlier so that we don't end up going into overtime. I hope the teachers will bear with me for that.